Hi, welcome to Digging for Truth, presented by the Associates for Biblical Research. I'm your host, Henry Smith. On Digging for Truth, we present archaeological and historical evidences that show the reliability of the 66 books of the Bible. Now today, we have a guest on our program who will be familiar to you if you watched Digging for Truth before. He's our friend, Dr. Titus Kennedy. He's an archaeologist and author, and he's here today to talk about his new book. So Titus, welcome back to Digging for Truth. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me back again.
All
Good
right.
to be here.
You're becoming a veteran of the show. We're very happy about that. Before, you were on the show to talk about your book, Unearthing the Bible. And also we talked about the Exodus in some previous programs. But today, we're here to talk about your new book. And I think people are going to be very excited about this, Excavating the Evidence for Jesus, and we're going to be doing it in 2 episodes, so we'll have some time to develop it together. So let's begin by talking a little bit about some of the early part of Jesus's life. Now, one of the items we want to jump in, we have a lot to cover, so we're going to jump in right away. I wanted to ask you, there's stuff out there on the internet, and for pretty serious people about the Bible, a lot of it seems like silliness, but it impacts people. One of them is, there was no village at Nazareth in the first century, and therefore, what the Bible says about that is illegitimate. Let's talk about Nazareth a little bit, if you would.
Well, that was a concern from an archaeological standpoint in the past, because not a lot of work had been done at Nazareth, and we also didn't have these first century inscriptions or other first century sources outside of the New Testament talking about Nazareth as a functional village in the first century. But as more archaeology was done at Nazareth, we understood then that it definitely was a first century village. I mean, you look around the Church of the Annunciation excavations that have been done there have found materials from the first century. And then you have this Church of the Nutrition excavation that was done, Ken Dark involved in that, and how they found this first century house underneath the church. So there are tombs, there's pottery, there are fragments of ritual stone vessels from the first century. So a number of things from different areas of Nazareth, even around the Mary's Well and some of the water installation areas, that show us, yes, this was an occupied village in the first century. And the primary occupants were Jews that observed the Mosaic Law. So it fits quite well with the Gospels.
Yeah, your point is well taken. We didn't have the evidence, but this is one of those basic fallacies that's out there a lot. We talk about it on the program a lot. You're obviously familiar with the argument from silence. We have something in a sacred text. We don't have a correlation with archaeology, but we have found over and over again in time, we just give it time, we end up finding those kind of correlations which you describe. Now, you lay that out in your book, and again, we want to mention Dr. Kennedy's book, Excavating the Evidence for Jesus, is available on the ABR website. Okay, so, we're talking about Jesus's life, in Nazareth. We're going to just go backwards a little bit and talk about related to the birth narratives. And of course, we have this very significant event that's recorded there regarding the Roman census. And this has been a point of controversy in scholarship and New Testament studies and so on. And you cover this in your book, and it's good that you do that. Let's talk about that and talk about how you see the issue.
So the primary criticism of the whole census is that Luke must not be getting the timing right to coincide with Matthew's nativity narrative. And then additionally, it's usually said that Luke is talking about the wrong kind of census and some of the protocols are not there. And this is actually one of the sections in the gospel where a lot of scholars, even Christian scholars who think that the gospels are historically reliable, would say that there's an error. So they'd say there's a small amount of errors in the gospels, and this is one of them. But I think that we have sufficient archaeological evidence and other material from ancient historical texts that really explains what's going on here and that Luke is getting things right. So first of all, Luke says that there is a census of the whole Roman world that Augustus ordered. And in the records of Augustus, he talks about 3 censuses of the whole Roman world that he ordered. And one of those was in 8 BC. That's the only one that's close to the 4 BC death for Herod, just a bit before Herod's death. And then he says that Quirinius was a ruler in Syria at the time. So Luke uses a very general term for this. We don't know exactly what the Latin or Roman specific term would have been, but he's some kind of ruler. And if we look into the life of Quirinius, we see that he held many positions, including governor, but he was also a legate of legions. He was a military commander. And at this time, that was his role, a military commander. We even have him in the area of Syria. There's a very important Latin inscription. It's an epitaph, and it talks about a census that was ordered by Augustus that is being carried out by a particular officer, and Quirinius is the legate who is over him, and it's in Syria province. Now, Syria province had jurisdiction over Judea as a client kingdom at this time, at the time of the birth of Jesus. So all that connects. There's more about Quirinius that we could go into, and sort of 2 governors idea in Syria province, but all of this fits quite well. You know, we don't have the exact date written in Roman records, just as we don't in the Gospels, but we can make a good guess as to when that time was.
Yeah, it's very good, and again, I think it's a matter of carefully studying the text, looking very closely at it. So we want to again recommend folks pick up Dr. Kennedy's book if they want to explore this issue further. We also had an episode of Digging for Truth on Quirinius with Brian Windle in the past as well. Now, I want to turn to what I found to be a really intriguing discussion that you had about the Star of Bethlehem. We're going to introduce that, and then I want to develop some more with you in the second part. Or in the next segment, excuse me. So give the audience a little taste of the bigger picture of the Star of Bethlehem, and then we'll talk more about it in the next segment.
Well, the Star of Bethlehem, sometimes it's also called the Star of Jesus or the Star in the East. So this is the star that the Magi saw that led them to where Jesus had been born, led them to Jesus, and they associated it with him. Possibly because of a messianic prophecy. And many people have been trying to figure out, when did this star show up? What exactly was this star? So there are different theories about it in terms of conjunctions of planets or some specific star or a planet or a divine light or an angel. And so I was looking at the text of Matthew and looking at other ancient Greek texts that use the same word and idea, and then this other document called the Revelation of the Magi, and just trying to piece together what made sense, and is it restricted to a certain astronomical event, or is it something else?
All right. Well, we're gonna develop that some more in our next segment and talk further about the Star of Bethlehem. And friends, we'll be right back after this break.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures. For students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible, please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm Henry Smith. I'm here with Dr. Titus Kennedy. We're talking about his book, Excavating the Evidence for Jesus. And friends, as you can see, I have a lot of notes here in the book because there's so much good material in it, and we want to encourage you to pick it up at the ABR bookstore. Now, Titus, we started talking about the Star of Bethlehem, and you have some good material in there explaining the background of the Magi, where they may have come from, Persian connections and all that. So we encourage people to pick it up so they can read that. But what I'd like you to do is explain further what you see in the text, what the meaning of the word aster is in Greek, the word star, what it can mean, and what you're looking at this leads you with a little bit of a different alternative interpretation.
Yeah, so aster can mean many different things, and this is one of the first issues that I was looking into in terms of what does this have to be, or what can this be? It can be a star, of course. It can be a planet also. But one of the other uses that we find in ancient Greek literature is some kind of angelic being that is emitting a light. In fact, in some sources, it's used as an angelic being emitting a light, guiding someone, like guiding a ship safely to port or through a storm. So this, I thought, all right, that's something that connects a little bit more, or makes more sense with the idea of the star taking the Magi to the house where Jesus was, exactly to the house. So a star, as we think of it in English, can't do that. A planet can't do that. And we also have this appearing and reappearing that's happening in Matthew too. So that, of course, we could say, all right, a cloud came over, or the rotation of the earth, but the way that it's talked about, it's like something that's in very close proximity, and it pinpoints exactly what a house is. And so that led me to think this is not a normal star. It's not a conjunction of planets. It fits more the divine light, or angel guiding light. And then I read this revelation of the Magi, which seems to be a 2nd century AD source, extra biblical. It's not, of course, going to be 100% historically accurate, but it is interesting that we see what people thought about the Magi and this whole event at that time, and the way that it describes the stars also as this kind of divine light, or angelic type of being that is emitting a light and guiding them. And so that, coupled with the idea that astrology is something that's written against in the Bible, and especially in the Old Testament, that led me to not go with the idea of it's an astronomical event that gives an astrological type of sign. And instead, it was some sort of a miraculous thing that God engineered specifically for this event.
Yes. Yeah, and I really wanted to talk to you about this because I had never seen this before, and I was intrigued by it. But I want to encourage the audience that we're not deviating here from the biblical text. As I reflected on what Dr. Kennedy was saying, the text does have this broader range of meaning, and particularly the house, Titus. I thought that was a strength in your argument. Like how did a star go over a house? Like I've always wondered about that, and I never thought about it further. So we leave that for our audience to consider when they pick up a copy of the book. Let's keep moving though. One of the places that's a key place for Jesus' ministry in the Galilee, we're going to jump ahead here now, is to Capernaum. And so we have got the synagogue there, and potentially Peter's home. So we're going to shift subjects, but let's talk about that because there's a lot there to discuss.
So Capernaum was this seaside village on the coast of Galilee, and we've got two really important pieces of architecture there that are mentioned in the Gospels that have also been uncovered in archaeological excavations. We've got the synagogue and Peter's house. Well, when you go there and you see this white synagogue, quite impressive, most people are thinking, oh, okay, is this the synagogue that Jesus walked in and taught in and cast out demons? But it's not. We have that 1st century synagogue underneath this one, but it is preserved enough for us to know things about it. It's got the black basalt walls preserved up to about 3 feet. And it's in the same general plan as this newer synagogue, but the excavations there show that it was in use in the 1st century, in the early 1st century. And so we know that Jesus was there when this synagogue existed, the black basalt one, and that's the one he would have used. And so the gospel writers got that correct. But when we read about Peter's house, especially I think it sounds like it's very, very close to the synagogue. Immediately they left the synagogue and went to Peter's house, arrived there. And if you walk from the synagogue to Peter's house, it takes you maybe 10 seconds. It's just down the street. And the Peter's house thing, of course, there's going to be more debate about that because it's not as identifiable architecturally. But it was turned into a church very early on, maybe late first century. And then we see that the walls get plastered and people start etching things on the walls, graffiti, although not in the modern sense of graffiti. And this graffiti is often praising Jesus Christ. So we see that it's a Christian meeting place, but there are a couple that also mention Peter there. And then we've got later pilgrims who come even before the official Byzantine church was built, and they talk about how it was Peter's house. So there is a long tradition of it, and there's no reason for us to believe that it wasn't Peter's house. He left, he ends up in Rome, right? It makes sense that he would have let the Christians use his house that he didn't need anymore to meet in as a church.
Yeah, that all seems to fit very well together. The proximity, the biblical text, the context, the tradition tracing back, all very good stuff. All right, well, friends, thank you for joining us for Digging for Truth. We're here with Dr. Titus Kennedy talking about his new book, Excavating the Evidence for Jesus. And we'll be right back.
Bible and Spade is a non-technical quarterly publication published by the Associates for Biblical Research. Written from a scholarly and conservative viewpoint, Bible and Spade supports the inerrancy of the biblical record and is a must-read for both the serious Bible student and anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Archaeological Evidence, properly interpreted, upholding the history of the Bible. Subscribe today at BibleArchaeology.org.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV, positively different television.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here with archaeologist Dr. Titus Kennedy, and we're talking about his book, Excavating the Evidence for Jesus. Now, in our last segment, Titus, we left off with a discussion of the synagogue at Capernaum and its relationship to Peter's house. Peter's house has both the archaeology and a tradition connected to it that runs down through history. There's a church that's been built over it. Actually, the one that's there now, it looks like a flying saucer, kind of, it doesn't look very nice, but the archaeology is great stuff. Now, speaking of tradition, we've got the phenomenon of Byzantine churches built at places in the biblical world related to events that occurred or supposedly occurred. Let's talk about that a little bit. Who were the Byzantines? Why did they build churches, and what are some of the significant places they built churches related to Jesus?
Well, the Byzantines, that's a term that we use. That's essentially the Christian Roman Empire. So we're looking at Constantine and later. And why did they build these churches there? So Constantine is the one who started this whole trend. Of course, he's not the only one, but many of the early Byzantine emperors were the ones who built these churches. And Constantine started with a focus on sites connected to important historical events in the life of Jesus. And the purpose seems to have been to preserve these places and to commemorate them. So they wanted people to remember the events and the places and for them to be preserved for the future because the historical reality was important. So Constantine had churches built in places such as the birthplace of Jesus, the tomb of Jesus, and then crucifixion site, or presumed anyway, the pool of Bethesda, and it seems the pool of Siloam probably, although they may have had it over the wrong part of the pool. And then we see many later churches that Constantine didn't build, but they were later emperors. And we looked at the one at Peter's house. So that was a 5th century church. And we could go throughout, the Nazareth, the Church of the Nutrition, one was built there. We also have the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth. It's quite early too. So many, many places. And when we investigate these things archaeologically and historically, we find that the accuracy of the locations is excellent. There may be some Byzantine churches that are off in their location for an event, but the early ones especially seem to be quite precise. People often have this idea in their head that the Byzantines just sort of picked a spot and made this church up, but that's not at all how it went. You know, they asked the local Christians where these things happened. They even investigated them. They removed previous structures like Roman temples that had been built there by Hadrian, and then they built them, trying to get them accurate. It's totally different than what the Crusaders did when they came to the Holy Land. They did just not have an idea where most stuff happened, and they just built things where they thought it did. And so the Crusader churches are often way wrong in their location, but the Byzantine churches are almost always correct.
Yeah, they really did their homework. And for friends who may be unfamiliar with our previous excavation, we found a Byzantine monastery at Khirbet el-Maqader, which is commemorating something. There could be several different events that's a possibility. One of them might be Abraham's altar. We don't know for sure, but certainly significant. Okay, so Titus, I wanted to ask you about a discovery that has been slandered so badly that it often sort of gets put out of people's minds, and that is the James ossuary. I'd like you to talk about that a little bit. You kind of wrote a few years ago for Bible and Spade and got me kind of like re-engaged with that, of that maybe it's been treated a little bit unfairly.
I think the James ossuary is an extremely important artifact. Now, the main problem with this is that it was not discovered in a regular archaeological excavation. It was looted from a tomb in Jerusalem, probably in the early 70s, as best we can ascertain. And we even have ideas of which tomb it might have been looted from. But the content of it, or the inscription, the content of the inscription is very important. So this inscription in Aramaic reads, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. And so when this was discovered, so to speak, on the antiquities market and then presented eventually to the world, there was obviously extreme interest in this. But initially, the IAA had a team of scholars that claimed that this was a forgery. And it ended up in that big forgery trial that went on for a decade, which resulted in many scholars looking at this in detail. And it was given back, the ossuary was given back to the owner, and there was nothing shown that it was a forgery. Actually, the reverse. Geologic tests show that the stone was the correct type of stone for the Jerusalem area and had been in a tomb. And then when they looked at the inscription, that was the main thing under question. First, they thought, okay, it's all fake. Then they noticed the patina in the beginning of it. So, all right, James, son of Joseph, that's correct. Well, then they found that the patina, that this ancient residue, was also present in the Jesus part, the Yeshua part. And so the whole inscription had been made at once in antiquity and then stored in the tomb, as an ossuary would be. And so to me, it seems like it's a totally legitimate, authentic artifact. And if so, it could be referring to Jesus, because the way that they go about presenting the name is very unique. Of all the ossuary inscriptions that have been discovered, only one other one we know of mentions the brother. So the brother was obviously very important here. Well, that other ossuary doesn't mention the father, so maybe the father they didn't even know who he was or something, or the brother was famous. Usually your ossuary would mention your name and your father's name, or your name and your profession, maybe your place of origin. So whoever wrote this is saying, James, son of Joseph, okay, that's an identifier. But even more so, brother of Jesus, this is somebody well known, he's famous. We're tacking this on as an extra. And so we know, or we could say with, I think, a good amount of probability, that this would be James's ossuary, leader of the Jerusalem church, who was martyred in Jerusalem in 62, meaning this is a first century inscription mentioning Jesus.
Extremely significant discovery, and unfortunately it's been slandered badly, but you developed this in the book. All right, well, believe it or not, we've run out of time, Titus, so stick around. We're going to do part 2, brother. We'll be right back with you for our next episode. And friends, thank you for joining us for Digging for Truth. We hope you join us again. Dr. Kennedy will be back for part 2 to talk about his book.